Your mother signed this to ensure I was taken care of. I've already listed the house. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your trash and get out before I change the locks. Brittany is moving into your room. That is exactly what my stepfather said to me minutes after we buried my mother. He didn't even pretend to be sad. He just threw a document onto the desk right in front of my face. I looked down at it. A quitclaim deed. It was dated 3 days before my mom went into a coma. The signature was a shaky, jagged mess that looked nothing like hers. It was a forgery. A desperate, clumsy forgery. Then I looked out the window and saw the black SUV with 2 heavy-set men watching the house. It all made sense. Stephen wasn't just greedy. He was terrified. The loan sharks had come to collect, and selling my mother's home was his only way to pay them back. I didn't scream. I didn't beg him to let me stay. I just picked up my bag and looked him dead in the eye. "Enjoy the house, Stephen," I said. "While you can. I bet you've never seen a man sell his own soul for a quick payday." Only to realize he signed the receipt in disappearing ink. If you've ever dealt with family who valued money over your existence, tell me in the comments. What was the moment you knew they were done with you? 2 hours later, I was sitting on a bare mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. It was a sharp drop from the velvet armchairs and mahogany finishes of the Rosewood estate, but at least the air here was clean. It didn't smell like betrayal. I looked around at the few boxes I had managed to drag with me. My clothes, my laptop, and the few small keepsakes I had salvaged before Stephen changed the locks. For the last 6 months, my life had been a blur of hospital monitors and hushed conversations with oncologists. I slept in a plastic chair next to my mother's bed so many nights that my spine felt permanently curved. I was the one measuring out morphine doses. I was the one managing the estate's bills, balancing the accounts that Stephen was actively trying to drain. Every time I questioned a $5,000 withdrawal for a business trip, he'd look at me with that patronizing sneer and tell me I didn't understand high finance. I understood it perfectly. I understood that while I was wiping my dying mother's brow, he was wiping out her savings at the casino. Then he brought Brittany home. He introduced her as a private nurse hired to help with palliative care. But I noticed things. I noticed she spent more time in the master bedroom than the sick room. I noticed the way she looked at the antique vases and the silver, appraising them like an auctioneer. She wasn't there to check vitals. She was auditioning for the role of the grieving widow, before the position was even vacant. The rage I felt sitting on my studio floor wasn't just about the eviction, it was about the performance I'd watched earlier that morning. You should have seen him at the funeral. Stephen stood by the open grave, shaking and sobbing, clutching a handkerchief as he accepted condolences from neighbors. They whispered about what a devoted, broken-hearted husband he was. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. But the moment the guests turned away to head to the reception, the mask dropped. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise, and hissed into my ear. "Stop looking so sour. You're embarrassing me in front of the investors." He was networking at his wife's funeral, but that wasn't the breaking point. The breaking point happened 10 minutes later. I looked across the cemetery and saw Brittany standing under a black umbrella, trying to look solemn. She was wearing a simple black dress, but around her neck was a double strand of vintage South Sea pearls with a diamond clasp. My breath caught in my throat. Those were my mother's pearls. The ones she had worn on her wedding day, the ones she had held in her weak hands just a week ago, whispering that she wanted me to have them when she was gone. Stephen hadn't just stolen the house or the money. He had looted the jewelry box before the body was even cold and draped the spoils over his mistress. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just greed. It was erasure. He wanted to wipe my mother and me out of existence so he could start his new life with his young girlfriend and a $5 million bank account. He thought he had won. He thought stripping me of my home and my inheritance would break me. But as I sat there in the dark, staring at the rain streaking the window of my tiny apartment, I stopped crying. I wiped my face and looked at my laptop sitting on a stack of books. Stephen thought he was the master of the house because he held the keys, but he forgot that I was the one who installed the smart home system. I wiped the last tear from my cheek and opened my laptop. The screen's blue light was the only thing cutting through the darkness of my studio. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a hunch. Stephen was arrogant, but he was also sloppy. He thought changing the locks was enough to keep me out. I navigated to the login page for the Rosewood Estate's main security mainframe. I typed in the admin password I had used for 5 years. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. He had changed it. Of course he had. He wasn't a tech genius, but he was paranoid enough to lock the digital front door. For a second, panic flared in my chest. If I couldn't get into the system, I couldn't prove anything. But then I remembered the blind spot. Stephen didn't know about the secondary system. 6 months ago, when I first started suspecting that his private nurse was neglecting my mother, I installed a standalone network of nanny cams. They were high definition, audio enabled, and hidden inside the bookshelves of the library and the master bedroom. They ran on an independent server that Stephen didn't even know existed. I typed in the password. Eleanor. 1960. My mother's name and birthday. The screen flashed green. Access granted. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrolled through the cloud archive. I didn't have to look far. I clicked on the file timestamped yesterday. 11:43 p.m. The night before the funeral. The video feed from the library filled my screen. It was crystal clear. There was Stephen, pouring himself a glass of my mother's vintage scotch, the bottle she had been saving for my wedding day. Brittany was there too. She was spinning around in the leather executive chair behind the desk, laughing like a teenager who had just broken into a liquor cabinet. I put on my headphones and turned the volume up. "Are you sure this will work, Stephen?" Brittany asked, picking up a piece of paper from the desk. "The signature looks shaky. It looks scribbled." Stephen downed his drink in one gulp. "It doesn't have to be perfect, babe. It just has to hold up for 48 hours. He leaned over the desk, his face pale and sweaty under the library lights. "The guys from the syndicate called again. They gave me until Friday. If I don't have the cash by then, they aren't just going to break my legs. They're going to bury me. So we sell it?" "We sell it fast," Stephen said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "We find a cash buyer who doesn't ask too many questions. We dump the house for whatever we can get, pay off the debt, and disappear to the Caymans before anyone realizes the title is dirty." I hit pause. My hand was shaking, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was from adrenaline. There it was. The smoking gun. He wasn't just a grieving husband making a mistake. He was a desperate debtor admitting to forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud. He was planning to sell a $5 million estate he didn't own, to pay off illegal gambling debts. I sat back against the cold wall of my apartment. I had the evidence. I could take this recording to the police right now. I could file an injunction. But then I thought about the legal system. I thought about how charming Stephen could be when he wanted to. He would claim the video was taken out of context. He would hire a lawyer to argue that the shaky signature was just my mother being weak in her final days. It would be a civil battle that could drag on for years, draining the estate's value while he lived in my house for free. No, a civil lawsuit wasn't enough. I didn't want to sue him. I wanted to destroy him, to put him away for good. I needed him to do more than just talk about a crime. I needed him to commit one. A big one. A federal one. He wanted a cash buyer who wouldn't ask questions? Fine. I would give him exactly what he wanted. The next morning, I walked into the law offices of Walters & Associates with a flash drive in my hand and a plan in my mind. Mr. Walters had been my mother's attorney for 20 years. He was an old-school lawyer, mahogany desk, three-piece suit, and a belief in the sanctity of a signature. When I played him the video of Stephen admitting to the forgery, his face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. "This is..." He took off his glasses, cleaning them furiously. "This is repugnant. We can go to the police immediately, Audrey. We can get an emergency injunction to stop the sale. We can have him removed from the property by tonight." "No," I said. "An injunction just stops him. It doesn't punish him. He'll claim he was under duress. He'll claim he didn't know the deed was fake. He'll find a way to wiggle out, and he'll spend the next 10 years living in my mother's house while we fight in probate court." I leaned forward. "I don't want to stop the sale, Mr. Walters. I want him to go through with it." Mr. Walters stopped cleaning his glasses. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And a slow, sharp smile appeared. He opened his drawer and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored file. "You know," he said, tapping the folder. "The irony is that he didn't need to do any of this. Your mother knew he was terrible with money, but she didn't want him homeless. This is her actual last will and testament." He slid a document across the desk. I read the highlighted clause. "Life estate. She left him a life estate," Walters explained. "It means he had the legal right to live in the Rosewood estate rent-free until the day he died. He would have had a roof over his head forever. But there is a condition." He pointed to a paragraph in bold text. Clause 4. "Any attempt by the life tenant to sell, mortgage, or transfer the title of the property shall be considered a repudiation of this gift, immediately voiding the life estate and reverting full possession to the remainderman." "The remainderman is you," Walters said. "If he had just sat still, he would have had a home. But by trying to sell it, he's not just committing fraud. He's legally evicting himself." It was perfect. It was the final nail in the coffin of his greed. "Let's help him dig the hole," I said. We spent the next hour setting the stage. We couldn't use a real buyer. I wasn't going to let an innocent family get mixed up in this. We used a shell entity, Mr. Walters managed for high net worth privacy. Something vague and corporate. Triton Holdings, LLC. We drafted the email. We didn't offer the full $5 million, That would be too suspicious. Desperate men get spooked when things are too easy. Subject: cash offer, Rosewood property. Offer: $4.8 million. All cash. 48-hour close. Condition: buyer requires immediate closing to satisfy a 1031 tax exchange deadline. The 1031 exchange was the detail that sold it. It's a real estate tax loophole that requires buyers to reinvest money within a strict time frame. It explained the rush. It explained the cash. It made the urgency feel corporate, not magical. We sent the email to the address Stephen had listed on the for sale by owner site he'd hastily thrown up. Then we waited. It took 11 minutes. My phone, still linked to the smart home system, pinged with an audio alert from the library. I put in my earbuds. Brittany, look at this. Stephen's voice was shaking. 4.8 million. Cash. They want to close in 2 days. Do it, Brittany squealed. Take it. No, Stephen said, his voice dropping into that arrogant tone I hated so much. They're in a rush. That means they're desperate. I can get more. I watched the email thread on Mr. Walters' screen. Stephen replied. He didn't accept. He countered at 5.2 million. Mr. Walters looked at me. He's haggling. The man is committing a felony, and he's haggling. Let him win, I said. Give him 5 million flat. Make him feel like the smartest man in the room. We sent the counter offer. Final offer. $5 million. Take it or leave it. 3 minutes later, the reply came through. Agreed. Send the contract. I looked at Mr. Walters. The trap wasn't just set. Stephen had just walked right into it and locked the door behind him. Schedule the closing for Friday, I said. I want a front row seat. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the offices of Sterling & Company, a boutique firm Mr. Walters used for high-stakes corporate transactions. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel rich just by walking on the carpet, silent, plush, and smelling of old money. I wasn't in the room. Not yet. I was sitting in a black sedan parked across the street, watching the live feed from a button camera discreetly pinned to the lapel of the buyer's attorney. At 9:55 a.m., a taxi pulled up. Stephen stepped out. He was wearing a suit I recognized an Armani he'd bought for my mother's 50th birthday party 5 years ago. It was tight around the waist now, straining against the bloat of cheap whiskey and stress. But he buttoned it with the swagger of a CEO closing a merger. Brittany trailed behind him, looking less like a nurse and more like a tourist, scrolling through her phone. I zoomed in on the feed. She was looking at overwater bungalows in Bora Bora. They walked into the conference room like they owned the building. Mr. Henderson, the buyer's attorney, an associate of Mr. Walters named David, stood up. Thank you for accommodating our timeline. My client is eager to finalize the 1031 exchange. Happy to help, Stephen said, his voice booming with false confidence. He sat down, drumming his fingers on the glass table. He was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead even through the grainy video feed. He looked at the bottle of water on the table but didn't drink it. He was vibrating with adrenaline. We have the wire transfer queued, David said, sliding a thick stack of documents across the table. $5 million, pending verification of the title transfer. Do you have the deed? This was it. The moment of truth. Stephen reached into his briefcase. His hand trembled slightly, but he masked it by smoothing his tie. He pulled out the quitclaim deed, the one with my mother's forged, shaky signature. He laid it on the table like a royal flush. Stephen calmly claimed the title was clean, saying his late wife had transferred it to him before she died. When asked about her daughter, Audrey, he spun a cruel lie, calling her an unstable addict who had signed away her rights for cash. Hearing him destroy her reputation just to complete the fraud, Audrey waited. The buyer's attorney slid over the bill of sale. Stephen signed without hesitation, accepted a $5 million wire, and smiled, convinced he'd won. That was when the doors opened. Audrey entered with her lawyer and 2 men who were clearly not there to negotiate. Stephen mocked her, confident the deal was done. Audrey calmly corrected him. She revealed the real will. Stephen had only been granted a life estate, the right to live in the house, not sell it. By attempting to sell the property, he had voided that right instantly. 5 minutes earlier, he had a home. The moment he signed, he legally evicted himself. Worse, the money he'd just accepted was now evidence. A detective identified the crime for what it was. Federal wire fraud. The transfer was frozen. Stephen panicked. His mistress tried to flee until the detective revealed audio recordings and stolen estate jewelry, tying her in as an accessory. As Stephen was handcuffed, he begged Audrey, calling himself her father. She shut him down with one final truth. He hadn't raised her. He'd merely tolerated her. And now, as landlord, she was evicting him. Stephen was dragged away. The house was reclaimed. The locks were changed. Later, alone in the quiet estate, Audrey held her mother's pearls and finally breathed. Sometimes revenge isn't destruction. It's letting someone sign away their own future while you keep the keys.